Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Geddes Munson with us. Geddes, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Oh, my pleasure, Bronson. Thanks for inviting me to come.
Absolutely. Now, Geddes, you are the solutions architect for Mixpanel, which will be exciting for a lot of our audience because whether you know it or not, Mixpanel comes up on about every other interview on this program. It's just one of those names, it's one of those tools that everyone in the know knows about it. So we get to talk to somebody on the inside that actually helps users get the most out of it. So this is going to be really cool. But first, tell us, what is Mixpanel, just in case people don't know?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Mixpanel, we are, at the very basic level, an analytics tool, right? So what that means is we provide you libraries for various platforms. If you're a web developer, we give you JavaScript libraries. If you're a mobile developer, we'll give you Android or iOS libraries. These make it really easy to collect data about user behavior and what the users are actually doing in your app. And then this data gets sent over to our servers, so we're entirely in the cloud, and then we'll store it for you, we'll warehouse it for you, we'll process it and provide awesome visualizations and analysis of how your users are behaving.
Yeah. Now, make the case for metrics in general. Your whole entire product is built around the idea that metrics matter. So tell us, why do metrics matter?
Metrics matter for a lot of reasons. The first is really to validate a lot of assumptions that we make about technology, about websites, about user experience. We make a lot of guesses about, this line of copy will be better than that line of copy, or this user flow will be more effective than that user flow. And before, we really had a data-driven culture here, and as product managers and developers in technology, a lot of times that was based on gut. And if there were disagreements between different people on the team, usually it ended up being, you might have heard this phrase before, a kind of a hippo decision, where the decision was made by the highest paid person's opinion, is what the hippo organization is. And with metrics, you don't actually have to rely on that. You can literally validate your assumption or prove that one user experience is definitively better than another in terms of measuring your goals. And so that's really important. It's also really important to validate your product, right? Especially early on. So, you might not have a lot of users, but if you can use metrics to show that the few users you do have are incredibly engaged, that tells you have a winning product. And that's especially for someone that's, probably the kind of audience that's watching Growth Hackers, where you're actually looking to grow and start. You're small right now and you want to grow. To even know if it's worth going after growth, you need to know, do people enjoy using my product? And metrics, engagement metrics, can give you an unbiased, really good news or bad news, but it'll give you the news definitively about whether it is or not.
Yeah. Now, this may seem like an odd question, but in your opinion, do you think it's ever possible to be too data-driven? On this program, we talk about data all the time. We love data, we love metrics, but can we go too far with it? What do you think?
Sure, you can go too far with anything. I think that it's still an uphill battle in a lot of organizations to make data part of your decision-making process. And so I wouldn't put that as a problem on anyone's radar right now, because not enough people are being data-driven. I guess one way to put it is, if you don't have a good analytics tool, for example, or your analytics tool exists but no one's using it, it's kind of an uphill battle to get people to take that and use it and integrate it into their decision-making process. And so, there's times when maybe you don't need to be data-driven, right? Like if you're just coming up with your concepts, right? Maybe then, but in general, it's always good to have.
Yeah, so the problem isn't too much, the problem is too little in most cases right now. Maybe in 10 years the discussion will be different, but for now that's the problem.
The customers that come to Mixpanel, they're not coming saying, we're being too data driven right now. Everyone that comes to us is saying, they have one of two problems. Either they say, we don't have any data and we want it. Another problem they have is we have too much data and we're drowning in it and we don't know what to do with it. But that's not really being too data driven. That's just not having a good data stack set up.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So you mentioned the companies that come to you and the problems they have. What are the kinds of companies that get the most out of Mixpanel? Who was Mixpanel built for?
Good question. We're built for any digital experience, right? So whether it's a web app or a mobile app, any app that really is their goal is engaging the consumer, engaging the customer, that's who Mixpanel is really good for. So if you want to get a sense of exactly how users are interacting with your app, and whether they're doing the things that you want them to do, that's what Mixpanel is for. And so for companies, a lot of stages it works, right? If you're early on the growth stage, Mixpanel is really good for that, and we have a lot of customers that are even on our free tier that are small but getting a lot of value out of Mixpanel. We have huge customers as well, well-established mobile applications with large user bases where they're at that point going for point-level optimizations, right? If we can increase our conversion rate by 1% to purchasers, right, that means millions of dollars for us, right? And so it works on both. It works both customers on a very large scale and customers on a very small scale.
Yeah, and your pricing structure compared to some of the competitors, it seems like you really do allow startups a place to begin the experience. You have the trial, you have some lower price points, and so you have, I think, captured a lot of that market because of the way you've structured the pricing in a lot of ways. What kind of growth has Mixpanel had? I don't know what you guys have disclosed publicly. I'm not asking you to say anything that you're not allowed to. But if you can, tell us about the number of users or revenue or how many events you're tracking. Just anything you can to give us a sense of scale right now.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I've been at Mixpanel for 18 months now. I came as the 7th employee here, and when I came, we had 100 paying customers. We just did the count yesterday, and we're at 1,008. So nice. It's been a remarkable, for me personally, it's been a remarkable 18 months of growth. And we think paying customers is a really good metric for us because these are people who actually every month, they're writing the check, and they're getting value out of the tool. And so, so it's been this remarkable period of growth, and it's been really fun to be part of this company while that's happened. And the great thing about our growth is we grow when our customers grow. So in addition to our number of customers increasing, the number of data points that we actually process is increasing. When I came, we were just at about 1 billion events per month across all of our customer base. Now we're at 12 billion events per month. Wow. And this represents both growth in new customers, but also growth within our own customer base. We have plenty of examples of companies that have come and started on our free plan and now are sending hundreds of millions of events to us every month. And that's just awesome to see because when they succeed, we succeed, and we really love being a tool that helps them grow.
Yeah, that's great. It's great when you win because they win. It means your priorities can be aligned. What have been the primary channels for that growth? I mean, where do the users come from? Is it word of mouth? Is it paid acquisition? Is it some other kind of marketing? How do they actually find out about Mixpanel?
Great question. So, in my experience, it's been entirely word of mouth. We hired our first marketing person 4 or 5 months ago, and until then, it was entirely word of mouth. Now, we did have a little bit of a paid search campaign going, which brings in some business, but it's certainly not our engine for growth. Our engine for growth has been just having a great reputation and having startup founders tell their startup founders about the tool, and that's been really good for us.
Yeah, that's a great way to grow. Now, as the solutions architect, part of your job, if I'm not mistaken, is to make sure that the users get the most out of the product. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me, what advice do you generally give to a new user who really doesn't know where to begin? They've decided that metrics matter, but they don't know much else. They don't know what to do next. What's some of the basic advice that you give them to where to start?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I usually tell someone who's just starting, who's sort of in this category of, I know I want to be data-driven, but I don't know how, right? For those folks, I actually have a pretty good way of a paradigm almost for constructing on how they should think about their data, and it works really well, especially for companies that are just starting out. And I tell them, you've got to think about your analytics in 3 categories. The first category of analytics are user acquisition metrics, which is essentially a single event that you fire when a user does something to express interest, right? For a website, it might be this user comes on one of your landing pages, right? For a mobile app, it's that first open of the app, that first app open. But it's some metric to just say, this is the very, very beginning. Now, a lot of times the acquisition metrics are where people stop, right? You see tons of press releases of apps saying, we got 100,000 downloads. Done, right? And that's an acquisition metric, but that really doesn't tell you too much, right? Because the thing about user acquisition is you can always juice those numbers with money, right? You can always buy ads, you can always acquisition is a problem that has been solved. You can always get downloads. It just takes money. And so we tell them, okay, acquisition is your starting point, but you have to look further. You also have to look at user activation. And user activation are the users who've had that core experience of your app, right? So let's say it was a social network, something like Facebook, right? Maybe an activated user is a user who has made a status update, right? If it's a photo sharing app, an activated user is a user who's uploaded that photo, right? It's whatever that thing is that is the core app experience. And, activated metrics are important because that's when a user is really giving you a chance, right? They've done everything you can ask them to do based on faith in marketing, right? You made promises on your landing page. They were intrigued. They said, I'll try it. I'll go do the core app experience. So one thing you need to look at is how many of my acquired users then become activated. And if how many of them become activated, and if that's a low percentage, then that means, okay, you need to work on your marketing materials, or your sign-up flow is confusing, or the way to get from acquisition to activated is hard. So that's a really important metric to look at, but that's not even the whole story, right? You might have a great flow, it's really easy to use, and users get activated. They've given you the chance, and then they've decided, this sucks, this wasn't useful to me, right? And the third thing I tell startups to look at is retention. So out of your activated users that have given you a chance, that have put some faith in your product, how many of them come back and use your product again, and use your product again, and use it again, and how often do they come back? And that's retention.
Yeah.
And any growth hacker is going to be looking at all three metrics to understand their weaknesses and their strengths. It was interesting. About a year ago, we raised a venture round from Andreessen Horowitz, and the reason that they got in touch with us was because all these startups were marching through their doors and were putting screenshots of the Mixpanel retention reports in their decks. And so what is this Mixpanel company that everyone's using? The reason startups are putting it in their decks was because the retention report, that third metric, is so important for validating the product. Like I said at the beginning, if you have a small number of users, but they're really engaged and they're coming back every day or every week, whatever the flow of your app is, then you're a winner. And with money, then you can solve the acquisition problem, but that retention number is really, really important.
Yeah, that's great insight into not just a beginner, but intermediate. I mean, that's what we need to be thinking about. Now, what mistakes do you see companies make when they first start using Mixpanel? Is there any common things where they all want to do this, and that's not the right thing to do?
So the biggest mistake that people make when they start using Mixpanel is not thinking clearly through their events. So Mixpanel is an event-based analytics tool. Our data model is you fire an event whenever a user does something interesting, right? So like I was talking about a video upload or a picture upload or sign up, steps in the sign up flow. Those are all events that you fire off to Mixpanel. And then you need to send properties with those events as well so that you can segment, right? So a classic property to send would be what acquisition channel did this user come from? Did they come from a paid search campaign? Did they come from a viral channel? So you can segment that way and see which of these channels are most effective. And it really takes a lot of upfront thinking to do this well. A lot of people that want to get started really quickly, they might just throw up a generic event called viewed page, and that's it, right? And then at that point, you might as well be using Google Analytics because all you're getting is an aggregated list of what pages people were viewed. But if you really think about these three categories, acquisition, activation, and retention, think about what events you would put in each of those categories and add code to your site or your app to fire those events. Then you'll get a lot more usage out of Mixpanel. So the biggest problem is actually not thinking through ahead of time what you want to track.
Yeah. Is it a good strategy to place an event on everything and then go back after the fact and sort it out? Or is that just messy and doesn't really work?
I tend to tell folks not to do that. It is a temptation, right? So that's another thing people do, right? You see, especially people from an engineering background who are developers, they might, add an event for every function call in their app, right? And it just becomes a lot. It becomes a lot. And the other thing is, you need to be smart about what data you're tracking because those are real resources you're using, right? Every piece of data you track is going to is going to either, whether you're using Mixpanel or some other tool or even your own system, that's going to, you have to store that data. It's going to cost you money. And so it's really important to think up front about, okay, is this thing I'm tracking actually actionable? Is it a decision off of? So whenever you add a track call, whatever tool you're using, you should be asking yourself, is this something I'll be able to use to make a decision? If not, then I probably shouldn't be tracking it.
Yeah. What are some of maybe the most powerful tools of Mixpanel that you think get underutilized or ignored by people? Is there any golden gems that are hidden that people just don't talk about enough, in your opinion?
Well, I've talked about retention a few times. I'm going to talk about it again. It is the most powerful tool that we have. It's also the one that looks the most intimidating upon first. And so we actually have a lot of customers, and we have data on this ourselves, right, who click on the action tab, and they never go back because they see some numbers and it's confusing to them. And so one of our jobs as solutions architects is to make sure to explain what is this report actually telling you and why is it important. So retention is huge. The other thing that's really huge on the Mixpanel side is our revenue analytics, and that is something that is relatively new for us, and so not a lot of people know about it, but we actually make it really easy. In addition to tracking generic events when users do interesting things, we have a specialized line of code you can add whenever a user makes you money, right? If they buy a virtual good or they make a purchase or they upgrade to the pro version or whatever it is, we call it tracking charges. You track those, and then we let you calculate things very easily that from a revenue perspective, you're going to want to know. You're going to want to know your average revenue per user, your lifetime value, how long it takes a user to reach their maximum lifetime value, and as you're working on your paid growth campaigns, you'll know how much you can afford because you know how much money you'll be getting back.
Yeah. Do you see any themes or trends with the companies that really get the most out of Mixpanel? Is there any common makeup or any common things that you see with the teams that just really utilize it to the max so that we can imitate them, the people watching this interview?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. We definitely see a lot of success with companies that set up empowered growth teams. And growth teams are a really interesting phenomenon. Usually it involves, at a minimum, an engineer and a product manager. But the important thing about a growth team, actually at minimum it can just be an engineer, right? But the important thing about a growth team is that the growth team is empowered to make changes quickly. They don't have to go through, a regular code review process. They don't have to go through a regular release cycle, but they can do changes on the fly. That's why you need to have an engineer there. And these people are going into Mixpanel, which is a real-time tool, and making changes a few times a day and tweaking and trying new versions of copy, putting buttons in different places and seeing how that impacts things, and they see real results there. So having a kind of structure that allows you to be really nimble and make decisions quickly based on the data as you get it is something that's been really successful. And we've had great events at Mixpanel done by people who run growth teams, right? We did a great event with BranchOut, who had a growth team. Airbnb has a growth team. These kinds of companies with growth teams really can use analytics to make lots of small tweaks, or sometimes even big tweaks, and have huge impacts.
Yeah, that's great. A lot of people watching this are jealous. They want a growth team, so they aspire to have one. Right now they have a growth guy or a guy that does a couple different things. But I think that is the goal. Get to the place where you have a team of people really focus on that set of problems, because it's a big deal. Go ahead.
He is empowering them, right? If where we don't see a lot of success is if you have an analytics guy who isn't empowered to actually make product decisions or doesn't have a lot of influence, because this person can do all the reports and make all the points they want, but it's going to be much slower for them to actually close the loop and bring this back to the product.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the biggest wins that you've seen companies make after they use Mixpanel? They come, they see their data, they make actionable decisions based off the data, and then this happened. What are some of the case studies that you point to for things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one I like to talk about a lot, because one is that they let us. We've done a case study with them, is Fitbit. So Fitbit is one of the pedometers that's out there. It tracks the number of steps that you take every day. And the way a Fitbit works is you have to sync it via Bluetooth to either your phone or your computer so you can upload that data. And a very important part of the initial user experience for the Fitbit is making that sync work. Because if that sync doesn't work, the product's useless. And Fitbit used Mixpanel to see that on their, people using the computer version that are syncing with their computer had about a 90% success rate for doing that sync that first time. But they were also collecting data for their mobile app, and they were able to see as soon as they installed Mixpanel, they saw, oh my goodness, our conversion rate for people syncing with the mobile version is only about 50%. It's about half of what it is on the desktop. And so there's some problem there. And the great thing was they immediately saw in the data there is an issue. And if you think about it, this is someone who just paid whatever it is, $50, $100 for a Fitbit. And so they are pretty motivated to get it to work. They've already spent the money. And if they're not syncing successfully, there's something terribly wrong. And so what the Fitbit guys did was they took a look at their flow, and they saw exactly the steps where they were losing people. And it was the step where there's actually the, you hold your Fitbit. In fact, I have one right here. I can show you probably.
Yeah.
So this is a Fitbit, right? And, the part of the step is you take your Fitbit and you hold it next to your phone, right? And you're like, come on, sync. Why aren't you syncing, right? And the screen on the phone says, I'm searching for my Fitbit, and the Fitbit is just like, doing nothing, right? And so I can show you these things look like. And this is the step where it was falling apart. And what they realized, or they made a guess, and the guess was that the Fitbit wasn't actually awake. And you have to actually tap the screen of the Fitbit to wake it up, and then it'll successfully sync. And on the computer version, there was a big line of text saying, tap your Fitbit to wake it up. But they hadn't put that in their mobile version. They had limited screen real estate. And so they made two changes. Two simple changes. You'd think this would be, when they saw this, they're like, is there a hardware problem? Do we have to get our engineers involved? Do we have to ship new devices? Are they correctly? No, it wasn't anything that. All they needed to do was push out to their mobile app two changes. One, add a line of copies saying, hey, tap your Fitbit to wake it up. The second change they had to make was they changed the diagram, and they made a diagram of a finger tapping the Fitbit, right? And that's what they did. And then their rates went back up to what they had been on the computer. And they were able to solve that problem right away. So that's an example I like to tell about how that initial user experience can be such small things that for users. And by testing and releasing new versions and then seeing the results, you can really fix things.
Yeah, that's such a great example because, it shows us that the problem isn't how hard the solutions are. The problem is you don't know there's a problem, right? And so I love that example. And Mixpanel solves that problem. It shows us here's what the flow looks like, here's where it's broken, and sometimes the solution is actually the easy part. Now, in Mixpanel, you guys have continuously innovated. There's always some new feature, new piece of the product that's kind of coming out every few months, it seems like, and you've added awesome new things. I want to ask you about some of these things that have been added over the last year or so.
Sure.
Talk to us a little bit about Mixpanel streams. What are they and how do they work?
Okay, I'm happy to talk. Streams actually is one of the oldest products we have at Mixpanel. It isn't one that we've added recently. It predates me at Mixpanel. And the thing about streams is that, just so for your audience to know what it does, it takes a slice of your users who are on your site or on your app right now and pops up their names and pops up the events that they're firing, as just like this flow that keeps scrolling down, and you can see exactly what's going on. Now, the thing about streams is that it's real eye candy, right? Like you can see, it's very exciting for a developer to fire up streams and be like, people are using my app. This is exciting, right? The problem with streams is because it's a bunch of data about its individual users, right? And it just keeps flowing and scrolling. It's actually hard to make decisions with it because it's so individualized that you get lost. You look at the tree, but you can't see the forest, right? Whatever that, I forget the phrase. There's some nice phrase there, but you think you know what I mean. And so streams used to be our default view because people loved seeing it. They kind of got mesmerized by it. But we now have sort of buried it like 3 or 4 links down on our navigation because it actually isn't an easy tool for making data-driven decisions. You want to be looking at aggregations to do that, and Streams doesn't let you do that easily. So Streams is a lot of fun. And it's also like, when you're giving a demo or someone like, ooh, you always get that ooh moment. But the problem with a lot of times with like reports that are very flashy is they're not as actionable. And that's the issue with Streams.
Yeah. So then tell us about Engage a little bit, because it's not quite as flashy and just for eye candy.
Absolutely. So Engage is the, let me turn on screen share and show you what this product
please.
is like. Definitely can do that. So what Engage is the old name for what we now call notifications. And so what notifications are, it's part of our People Analytics product. And the cool thing about People Analytics is it lets you build profiles about all of your users. For example, I'm showing a list of all of my users who created their account within the last week. And I can click on any of them, and I can see all sorts of information about them. I can see their accounts. These are all customizable, properties about a user. I can see their account status. I can see which version of the landing page experiment they saw when they came on board. I know that they've left 87 reviews. The example here would be like a site that sells shoes, right? So you can see they've ordered 2 shoes. I can see all this information about a user. And what notifications lets you do is actually have triggered automated notifications that get sent to users once they meet certain criteria. And it's useful for a lot of reasons. One reason you might want to use it is if you wanted to send a message to a user after, they may have signed up for an account, but they haven't bought anything yet. Mm-hmm. You could use notifications to do that. Say, all right, if a user has signed up for an account, 2 weeks have gone by and they haven't bought anything yet, let me send them an email that has a coupon code, right? Or something like that. Or let me send them a push notification that tells them about a sale that we're having this week. That's the kind of thing you can do with it. I think because we have Skype, my internet connection's too slow to do the share, so I'm going to turn back on video mode.
Okay.
That's the general idea.
No, that's great. Thank you for showing us that. Now, tell us about the revenue analytics a little bit. You mentioned it earlier. Why is that so powerful? Why is understanding revenue such a meaningful part of analytics?
Yeah, well, if you think about revenue, it is the lifeblood, right, of any company, right? If you're not making any money, then why are we here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, there's early stage companies where you're not worried about revenue right now. You're worried about growth, and that's why we have other Mixpanel reports. But for companies that have decided revenue is a goal of theirs right now, once it becomes a goal, it becomes the goal, right? Mm-hmm. And it's really important. So what Revenue Analytics lets you do is automatically send the data to Mixpanel every time someone spends money and allows you to look at that in a very detailed way. So the obvious calculation is the average revenue per user, and that tells you, okay, for every user that signs up, how much money do I make out of them? And so let's say you had a game, right? And you had for every 10 users that signed up, 8 of them never spent any money, but 2 of them would, right? And let's say each of them might buy $10 worth of virtual goods, right? So for 10 users, you've made $20, and so your average revenue per user then becomes $2 per user. And why you want to know that number is so that you know how much you can spend on acquisition, right? Mm-hmm. If you know you're making $2 per user and that's almost all profit, you could spend up to $1.99 on per acquisition for mobile ads. Now, that is the very generic case. Now, where that breaks down is, well, let's say you do this calculation for your organic users. You find you have $2 average revenue per user. Now, that's not actually a guarantee that if you purchase traffic, that those guys will also be worth $2 per user, because they might be less motivated. They might have been invited by friends or whatever. They might be doing it as some sort of incentive campaign for another game. And so it's really important to be able to segment your revenue out by things you know about the users. So one thing you might know about the user is, well, what acquisition channel did they come from? If they came from an AdWords campaign, am I still able to get $2 per user? Maybe yes, maybe you get more from them, but maybe no. And so you might say, if they come from AdWords, I only get 50 cents a user, so I'm only going to bid 49 cents for those, for that acquisition. The other thing is you can see how achieving certain milestones impacts revenue. So you could say, all right, my average revenue per user is $2, but what did those 2 users do who spent $10 each, right? And say, oh, those users all made it to level 5. So you can segment out by like most recent level achieved and say, all right, users who've made level 5, my average revenue for them is 10 users. So I need to do everything I can to like push users into level 5 to make that happen. And you can make both product learnings and marketing learnings and see how it impacts your bottom line.
Yeah. Now, when you had Mixpanel open a moment ago on screen share, on the left side of the page, there's a number of kind of tabs, a number of different sections to the site. Do you think the goal is for a company to really master every single aspect of Mixpanel to get the most out of it? Or are there use cases where you don't need these 3 things, but you need these 4? How do you view the interaction between the user and the fullness of the product?
Yeah, good question. I think that both sides of Mixpanel, to understand those tabs, there's 2 sides to Mixpanel. There's the event side, what we call engagement, and there's the people side, which is where the notifications and stuff and the revenue stuff come on that we've been talking about. That's where that falls under. Mm-hmm. And so both are really important, right? Engagement is all about collecting the data. People analytics makes it easy to take action on the data, right? With people analytics, you can take action without having to make, program changes to your site. You can actually send notifications without doing that. And so that's one way to think about it is, the engagement reports are very important for understanding your users. The people reports are very important for taking action right away. And that's what we wanted to make easier. So yeah, I think that all the reports that Mixpanel has are valuable to most companies. Now, there's plenty of companies that use just engagement. They don't use people. We're working hard to get them on people, and they see the value in that. And that product is growing very quickly. So that answers your question, I think.
No, absolutely. And the reason I ask is because a lot of people, they start with Google Analytics, which is just a flood of information, most of which has no bearing whatsoever on the stuff they need to get access to in terms of data. And Mixpanel is a different world. It's not a flood of information. It's a lot of valuable information for people that are running companies. So I wanted to make that distinction that this probably is a product that you want to master as fully as you can. That was my guess at the answer anyway.
It is. Last time I logged into Google Analytics, I counted, and there were 47 links on the left-hand side, right? And if you log into GA, and you're not trained or you're not an expert, you have no idea what those links do, right? So what most companies end up doing is, they hire a consultant to maybe set up 3 or 4 reports that they go into. And then Google Analytics really becomes a reporting tool. Whereas with Mixpanel, we want to make it a tool that is inviting, right? And so there's not 47 links, there's a few links. They all have specific purposes and functions. And when you click on them, you immediately understand what this data is telling you, no matter how technical or trained you are. And then we have little tempting buttons you can click, right? This little arrow that you can expand to find out more information and to dig deeper. And so our goal there was to make a product that's both easy to use but incredibly powerful, and to allow people feel comfortable not just pulling reports, but feel comfortable interrogating the data, right? Feel comfortable asking questions, asking follow-up questions, and not feeling like they have to go through an analyst to do it.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you all also have a site that actually educates users about site analytics kind of in general. Where can people find your education platform right now?
So it's mixpanel.com/education. And what we do is we do monthly events here at our headquarters in San Francisco. And we invite great minds in analytics, whether some are Mixpanel customers, some aren't Mixpanel customers, to talk about things that they've learned. Actually, tomorrow we're going to be doing one with Airbnb. And they're going to be talking about 2 interesting things. They're going to talk about how they decreased their conversion rate, which why do they want to decrease your conversion rate? Well, it was for the help center. They wanted to decrease conversion rate to tickets. And so actually a low conversion rate is what they were going for. They also talk about how they increased the conversion rate on the listing side for people trying to list their apartment. And these are great stories because what we invite these customers of ours and also people just using analytics in general to come in and tell us their stories and share the details, right? And that's the important part. It's not just generic, hey, I was able to increase my conversion rate. It's here is the problem we had. Here's a screenshot of our old view. Here's a screenshot of our new view. Here, changing this copy here had this impact. And there's specific stories. And that's really the best way to learn, is to learn from these specific stories because, it's an abstract concept, but having real people bring it down to earth, we found to be a very valuable educational tool.
Yeah, and is education a part of Mixpanel's growth strategy? In your all's mind, the more people know about analytics, the more meaningful Mixpanel is in their life? Oh,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest problem in analytics is education, right? some people have this vague idea, oh, I should be using data, but they don't know how. They don't know how to go about it. And on the solutions team, that's our mission, is to educate people. When we're hiring for solutions architects, one of our requirements is, are they a good teacher? Because you often have find yourself teaching about not only Mixpanel the product, but about concepts in analytics. And so our education page is one of the things we're doing by making these public is giving anyone a resource and learning, well, what are the experts in the industry? What are the very best people in analytics doing, and how can I emulate them?
Yeah, that's great. So what's the best talk you guys have had so far? You said you bring in these people, they talk about specifics. Has there been one talk that really stood out as like, wow, that was great information?
I don't want to, we have a lot of great people, and they're friends of mine who've all given talks, and so I don't necessarily want to say there have been, one is better than the other, but I will say that some are particularly appropriate for people on the Growth Hackers channel. So the one that we have by Voxer is very, very good for someone who's just starting, because Voxer, and for those who don't know about Voxer, they are a walkie-talkie social network. So it's voice communication. You have a Voxer app for iPhone and Android, and you essentially, instead of sending text messages, you send voice messages, and it's a pretty cool experience. And what Igal does, who's the product manager there, is he talks about this paradigm that I talked about. He talks about acquisition, activation, and retention, and it's a really good concrete example with examples from how they defined those for their app and how they looked at those numbers and how those numbers grew. So I'd say for folks who are in the stage where they are just starting out, the Voxer case study, the Voxer education pay, Voxer, I'm trying to figure the right name for it. The Voxer educational video is very, very good.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Geddes, this has been an awesome interview. I got one last question for you. Just kind of a broad question. You can take it any direction you want. What's the best advice that you can give to anyone that's trying to grow their startup right now?
Yeah, good question. The best advice I can give to anyone trying to grow their startup is just to iterate very quickly. I mean, we do that at Mixpanel, and that when our customers do that, we see lots and lots of success. So no matter what, obviously in a data-driven way, but no matter what tool you end up using, whether you're doing your own stuff, whether you're using Mixpanel or another tool, the most important thing you can do is focus on retention and iterate quickly to see how you can improve that. And those are the two big takeaways that I would leave.
That's great advice. Again, Geddes, thank you so much for coming on the program today.
Sure, this was a lot of fun.
It was fun. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks, Bronson.
Thank you.